100 cases of people who wandered into the wilderness but never came back. Accounts of children, people
was a coyote,
vanishing,
dog, or
seemingly
else.
swallowed up by the many endless forests across America, or even later found in ways that defy logic.
An animal.
Was it a person or an animal, or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on, and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man.
She described the way that the creature moved as being unnatural.
You've had problems in the neighborhood
It looked
before?
like it was
Yeah, my dog was
uncomfortable
killed here
in
just
its own
recently.
feet.
I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, it was standing out there. I'm out here looking through the window now, and I don't see anything.
She
I don't want to go
believed
outside.
that what she was looking at
Jesus
was
Christ,
pure
you better...
evil.
Sure. See ya.
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9" up.
Do you
Studied
see
the
him now,
cases of
sir?
about
Yes, I'm looking
100
right
people,
at him.
at least, who claim that they've been abducted
hang
by
on.
aliens.
He's
One
right.
of Dr.
Is
Matt's
he in your
patients,
yard,
Linda,
sir?
Yeah,
who
he's
says
gone.
she
He's
has
big.
been
Faded out.
abducted since childhood.
Reality. I was just
what I remember
being brought up this tunnel of light, right?
being around my
Up
bed.
this tunnel, I
And I
just
ran between them
noticed
and ran
parts
out
of my
of
life
the
that
room
wouldn't
to my
even
mother
occur to me to remember.
hide
Then I
from
knew that I
And
wasn't
I
being
never
brought
told
up,
anybody
that I
about
was
that, and I just buried it
And so then I came to the end of this tunnel and noticed there was a man that first searched me at first as
A
a place
mist or a fog
and I
kind
also
of
saw
moving.
relatives that had
The
died
action, the
that
motion
year.
caught my
Then
eye. It
the
actually
wizard,
started
without
taking
moving his
shape,
mouth,
taking
spoke to me and
form.
said,
The
"Struggle,
idea
you're
of the
too
Grim
young to
Reaper
die."
went through my head, cloaked figure. And as I was watching, it kept becoming more and more and more distinct to me that this was actually something with some type of presence. Like it knew I was there. And as I was watching it, it turned and looked directly at me. I felt like whatever this was angry at me. I wasn't welcome. It wanted me out. I had been face to face with a ghost or a demon, a spirit. I'm not really sure what. But this feeling of terror actually was going through me. And I really felt more that it was demonic. It was something very evil.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Real Supernatural Encounters. For my guest today, I have Gypsee. Gypsee, before you get to your experiences, could you give a brief bio about yourself?
Yeah, I'm 43 years old, and I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. And my parents were hippies, and that's why my name's Gypsee, in case anybody wants to know. And that's about it.
Okay. All right. Well, when you're ready, go ahead and start with your first experience and just carry on with the rest of them.
Okay. So my family is it sort of runs in the family. The paranormal runs in my family. And my grandmother was adopted when she was 7 years old with one of her siblings. So luckily, one of her siblings stayed with her, my Aunt Judy. And so they didn't have any knowledge at all about the biological family until, the internet was in place, and we were able to find out that it went beyond my mother, grandmother, myself, and that this was generational. So basically where it starts for me is when my mom was 18 and she was pregnant with me. She lived with my mother and father, my father, and her mother, my grandma, my grandma's boyfriend, and my uncle, who was a young teenager at the time. And they moved into a house off 67th and Powell in Portland. And we called it, or I've always heard it referred to growing up as the 67th house, because this was sort of an infamous house that I would hear about from time to time. And their experiences I'm not going to touch on so much because, but basically the scope of the experiences that everyone had in that place went from full body apparition that my grandmother witnessed on more than one occasion, to disembodied voices, a lot of footsteps, and there was poltergeist type activity in the kitchen area where it would sound like someone was breaking all the dishes, and you go in and nothing's broken, nothing's out of place. People would get locked out. There was no way to keep the lights on. And just kind of on and on. This was a place that not only my immediate family had experiences in, but couldn't keep tenants very long. People didn't tend to live there more than a year. And my family did stay there for a couple of years, to my understanding. So when my mom was pregnant with me, my grandma was determined that I would not be in that house, that she didn't feel like it was safe for a brand new child. And she found somewhere else for us to live. And I came a little early. So I did end up having to go back there for 3 days in total. So my family moves, and my grandma had me often. So she babysat me while my mom worked. I stayed the night regularly. She was like a second mom, and she had me a lot as an infant and, growing up. So right away, she noticed that when she was playing with me and stuff, that I would look past her and I would smile, like in recognition, and react to someone behind her or right above her. And she would look and, nobody's there. And this unnerved her at first, but I seemed to be happy and fine. So she just grew to kind of ignore these things. As I became verbal, I would talk to people who weren't there, and she just kind of ignored it because I seemed to be fine. There's a dump truck coming by, so if that's loud, sorry. So when I'm 3 years old, though, the experiences kind of shift. And she moved quite a bit during those years. And when I'm 3, she moved into a house right outside of Portland. It was a forested area. And it was when she moved there that this happened. So when my mom would bring me over there, I would point at the trees, at the same area of trees, and I would cry and have meltdowns. I was really an easygoing kid, so this was unusual for me. I didn't really have tantrums and stuff. And my grandma could tell that I was really scared. And I would point to the trees and I would cry and tell her that there were people watching me from the trees. And her best friend witnessed this. She knew me, well too. And they decided together that I was seeing things, that I had been seeing things that are there that they're not seeing. My grandma began to wonder at that point if this didn't have something to do with the haunted house on 67th. But this is like 1980, 1981 at this point. And, that information wasn't available. And so what my grandma did was actually really smart. She ended up reaching out to a parapsychology department within a college. I think it was Portland State University. And she told them everything from the 67th house and what had been going on with me subsequently. So they told her that it was possible to have got an attachment, we'll just call it that. And that she should picture me in a white light and just do this, frequently, just do this for a while. So she did, and it all stopped. The good, the bad, all of it. It just stopped. So I don't have memory of any of that. Obviously, that's just based on what I was told by my grandma. Nothing else happens between the ages of 3-4 years old and about 10 years old. That's the longest dry spell of my life as far as the paranormal goes. In fact, we lived in an apartment from the time I was 5. While my mom was in college, we lived in an apartment, and from 5 until I was about 10, when we moved to the house on 56th and Powell. That was the only place I've lived in my whole life that I never had one paranormal thing happen in, was that apartment. My mom never had anything happen there either, as far as I know. So we move into the house off 56th and Powell. The first house that was haunted we lived in was on 67th and Powell. So this wasn't that far away. This is like 11 blocks maybe away. And I don't think that that was really connected to the things that happened at the 56th house. It was kind of a coincidence that we did move into the 56th house on Halloween 1987. But yeah, my life is like an exercise in irony. You know, it's like a Seinfeld episode sometimes. It's the way things come full circle. So anyway, we move in there, and that place it had its own issues, I think, personally. I do. And I remember the very first thing that I would have happen in that house would be, my mom would be gone in the morning to work when I was getting ready for school. And my stepdad was a musician, so he would be asleep. He would get home about 3 a.m. and he'd be asleep in the morning. So I'd get ready by myself, and I would hear my name be called, not loud. It would be quiet, you know, it'd be like a whisper, you know, but I would hear it. And, you know, I would look, and there wouldn't be anything there. But that happened, you know, several times early on when we lived there. The first really notable thing that happened, and I'm going to try to do these in order because there was 2 of them. The one that happened while I was in the house, though, I was about 10 years old, and I think it was probably around the 4th of July because of what my parents wrote it off as. But I was in bed, it was dark outside, and my bed, I could see out the window that looked into the backyard. And there's some tall Douglas fir trees that are in my line of sight. And above those trees, I would say flying like as low as maybe a single engine airplane would fly, is about where up in the sky this happened. But it was this huge, at the time, what I said was a fireball. And I sat up and looked at that, and, you know, I must have looked at it for probably 20 seconds or something like that before I started yelling for my parents. But the way I can describe this is, it was this huge sphere of gaseous orange, like self-contained light. It looked to me as a kid like a big fireball, but it wasn't, you know, because it didn't, even though this gigantic orange thing in the sky should have at least illuminated the sky right around it, it didn't at all. It was completely self-contained, and it looked like gases moving within a sphere within it, you know. So and it moved very slow, like this, you know, very, very slow. If it was some kind of aircraft, it would fall out of the sky, you know. It was moving very slow. So I yelled for my parents, and I think because around that time I was learning about like comets and meteors and stuff, I thought that's what I was looking at, and it was going to hit the earth. Like, it freaked me out, and I started crying, like calling my parents top of my lungs, which really got them moving, because that wasn't something that happened really. You know, I was, like I said, I was an only child. I was a content kid. And they come running in, and I'm pointing out the window. There's a fireball in the sky. My mom so when my parents run in, I'm looking at them to say, there's a fireball over there. But when I go to point it out to them, it's gone. It's not there anymore. Yeah, it's gone. So I didn't, they wanted me to explain what I saw, because it wasn't typical for me to, have some kind of episode or wake up with a nightmare or anything, but I hadn't been asleep. Like I said, my dad was a musician. My stepdad was a musician, and we had a big house in the basement. There'd be practice. There was a lot of music in the house, and I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't tired. And I was just, laying there listening to my parents. So, yeah. And I had just gone to bed too. So I don't even think they considered that I was asleep. But so what my dad told me was it was a Roman candle. That's why I think it was around the 4th of July, because he really did write it off. She must have saw a Roman candle. So I accepted that at the time until several years later when I saw a Roman candle. And I was like, no, that wasn't a Roman candle. So I didn't know what it was until last year when I saw that documentary, The Phoenix Lights. Mm-hmm. That's what I saw. Those big gaseous balls of light that this woman described, and she had taken video of. Now I know there was several together in that instance, and I only saw the one. But from what I learned in that documentary, this was a phenomenon that was taking place around the world. At these, I think in the 70s it happened, and then in the 80s around a certain era of the 80s, and then in the 90s in that well-publicized time in Phoenix. I do believe that is what I witnessed now, because it's the closest thing that I've ever found that, could be that. So that was the first big thing. Now, I don't think that had to do with the house. I think that was I know that, but it happened while we, early on there, that first year we were there. The second thing that happened when these types of things picked back up in my life is what I think now I would be referred to as a glitch in the matrix. So we had moved from the Laurelhurst neighborhood to the Franklin neighborhood, and my friends were all back in the Laurelhurst neighborhood. The first time that my very, very best friend growing up came over to my house to play, my new house, we went riding bikes. And so we were riding, and we'd been riding bikes since I was 5 years old together. It's not like, we just met or something. But so anyway, at the end of my street, so I'm on 56. And then at the end of my street, there's a street called Tibbetts. And it is kind of like a shotgun alley in the sense that you can look up several city blocks, right, unobstructed. And so we're coming, she was, I thought right behind me, coming down Tibbetts. I stopped at 56 on my own corner when I realized she's not with me. So I turn around and I'm looking for her. Now I'm facing, looking up Tibbetts, looking for her. So I start hollering for her, and she doesn't answer back. And she was 2 years younger than me. And so when I want to say about 2 minutes went by of me, just sort of, I think I had wandered, rode back up the block. I'm hollering for her. She couldn't have gone too far, I'm thinking. But just when I start to get worried, right? Just when I start to get a little bit concerned, I see her. Now, at this point, I'm looking back up Tibbetts. I'm looking right up this shotgun street, basically. And she didn't come from this way. She didn't come from this way. she just all of a sudden was right here in the middle of the street. And I'll never forget it. The way, you know, she was like, you know, when kids kind of stand up on their pedals and they ride like that. She was riding like that. Her curls were bouncing and she had this big smile on her face. And it didn't occur to me that it was odd. I was relieved to see her. It was a new neighborhood. And I was relieved, oh, there she is, you know? So I go to jump on, you know, because I'm standing there with my bike kind of foot on each side, right? So I go to jump on my pedals. And as I go to do that, I barely glance down, barely, just, I can't even say a fraction of a second, glance down. I go forward towards her and she's gone. She's gone. And this like stunned me. I remember just, I'm dumbfounded is really the word, you know, because you sit there and you don't know what to think. I'm like, about 20 seconds, 15, 20 seconds goes by of this. And I start to get this feeling of dread in my stomach. And as soon as that started to kind of come up, here she comes down 56 from my side. And she's like, you know, hey, Gypsee, you know, and I didn't tell her what just happened because I don't think I had the verbiage to to like communicate it. And I didn't know what just happened, you know? So, and it just bothered me so much that, you know, I kept it to myself, which is something that, you know, I tend to do. And that's a pattern, you know, to come. So I didn't even tell my mom about it. But anyway, I would think about it from time to time. And the weird thing is that, I mean, it was all weird, but the thing is Shannon, at that present time, right? Her curls had relaxed. When Shannon was like 6, 7 years old, at this time, she was about 8 years old. But when she was like 6 going on 7, she had these really tight, like Shirley Temple type curls, right? And they were bouncy, and she was, you know, obviously a little bit smaller. When she was like, you know, current age, what we were at that age, her curls were relaxing, and she had more wavy, little bit more frizzy hair, and she had gained some weight. So the Shannon that I saw jamming up the street towards me was about 2 years younger. And when I think back, because I can picture it, I mean, it was such an intense, I don't know why it was that intense, but it's something that tattooed on my brain. And she was almost luminous, like there was a luminosity to her. But she was a couple of years younger. It wasn't the right Shannon. So that I don't know, obviously, but I think now is commonly called a glitch in the matrix. So that happened. Okay. So the next, I want to try to stay on what happens in the 56th house and then try to keep it in some chronological order, touching on the bigger things that happened, the more significant things. There were small oddities, obviously, but I'm going to stick to those. So now I can't say how far apart the ball in the sky and the glitch in the matrix thing happens, or much of it really, but so I'm about 10. I want to say that like 11, 12, 13 years old, not a lot that I can remember really goes on. It's every once in a while there'll be some oddity, but nothing that you can't just sort of brush off, right? And it's when I'm pregnant with my daughter Asia that the first big thing happens. And so what happened, I'll just explain it, is my room was in the basement at that time. I was 15. And so the basement was huge. So when you first walked into the basement, there was a stairwell going down a short flight of stairs, 90-degree angle, turn, another short flight of stairs, and then you quarter turn and you walk through a door. To your right, when you initially walk in, is a laundry room, followed by a wood shop area. When you walk forward, if you walk forward though, there's a dividing wall and there's like an archway. There's no door or anything. And you walk into the larger room like that had a bar that ran all along, it was a huge bar. Like somebody had big parties down there before we came, before we moved in. And on the other side of the bar was a big room, like a big party room, basically. And so my bed was at the far end. When you walk in to my area, the exterior wall is right there next. Okay. At the clear other end is the other exterior wall. And that's where the head of my bed was against. I could see lengthways across the whole room. I could see the entryway, right? And along at the top of the entryway were these vents, the ventilation system, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
And so I woke up and I'm laying there for a minute. It was daytime outside. We got good natural light down in that basement for a basement. And I'm just kind of laying there waking up for a second. And I go to, push myself up, and right ahead of me over the entryway, it seemed like coming out of the vent is what it looked like to me, was this huge head that if it was proportionate to a body you'd have to be 15 feet tall. It was huge. And it was all composed of light. Okay. White light, the structure, right, of the head. And it was a woman, and she had wavy hair, and it was also made of this white light, but within the white light were these golden moving orbs, and the little tiny ones. And they particularly moved along her hair, along the strands of hair, and it created this effect like there was a gentle wind. And so and her face was turned about 3/4 the way towards me, but she was looking. So if I'm right here, I'm like in her peripheral, but she's looking, her gaze is set upon a specific area that it never moved off of. And it's just set to this spot that is to my right, on the long wall to my right. And she's just looking down at this specific spot. When I first see this, you'd think that I would startle, that makes sense. A giant head is just there, right? But it didn't startle me. It just, basically I was like, I'm not seeing this. This is impossible. So what I closed my eyes like this and opened them again. Now, mind you, I'm halfway pushed up, right? From being on my back at this point. I hadn't even sat all the way up yet. And I go like this, thinking something like I'm dreaming or something. And she's still there. And so I pushed myself up and I closed my eyes harder and opened them again. And she was still there. And so I just sat there, sitting up in bed, looking at her for maybe 30 more seconds. She never says anything to me. I never said anything to her. I didn't get any kind of messages or anything like that. She never looked at me, not directly. And so oddly enough, I could never explain to you why I had this particular response, but okay. Oh, also in that, when I had sat up, another thing I did was I had taken my hand and I'd gone like this on my arm to see if I could feel it, because I just, but she was like, in her presence, there was a great peace. There was like this, and beauty, like a feeling of awe is really the best way to probably describe it. So I was never afraid. I just was, dumbfounded, I guess, again. So I don't know why I did this. She was still there when I did this, but I laid back down, and it was like the second my head hit the pillow, I was asleep. When I woke up, I had no memory of this. And this memory didn't come back until a specific, in a couple of years, when what I refer to as the Ouija board saga was happening. And I think I remembered when I was supposed to remember, but once I did remember, it hit me like a flashback. Now, unfortunately, I have had a flashback when I was 20 that was not so fun, but that's the way it hit me, minus the trauma attached to it, right? Like, but in the sense of the vividness and, that total recall that you get when you have a flashback for detail. And so, okay, so that happened. Now, I was pregnant when that happened. I can't remember how far along I was, but once I'd had my daughter, and she was somewhere between 6-7 months old, I was going to go over to a friend's house. And this person lived on the other side of Powell. It was going to be about 4 to 5 blocks to walk over there. And so I got to the end of my street. I have my stroller. I'm stepping off the curb. And as I'm stepping off the curb, I hear this voice, and I mean audibly. And I don't know how you can hear something both inside and outside of you, but I did. So as I step off the curb with my stroller, I hear a voice that is like thunder. It has like the quality of thunder. It says, "Go home." And this, like, I jumped back up on the curb with my stroller. I remember I put my hand and I looked both ways and I said, "What?" Like, and I stuttered out, "What?" Like, what? Like, it just was so shocking. And I just stood there, like, and I started slowly walking back towards my house, because of course you're going to go home, right? And so I go home, and I'm so like, what the hell? That I'm just standing there in the doorway of in the like entryway for a good few minutes. And I didn't even get her out of her stroller. I'm just standing there like, and then I just hear, now when I say hear, this is something that's you're going to hear me say frequently, but this is how I'm used to hearing things. And it's sort of an internal, almost like telepathy. And it's like, okay, go ahead, go. And I just felt this release, and I'm like, okay, so I do, I went, and I get to my friend's house. Now they lived in an apartment, and I had one friend in this group of people, and they were gang affiliated. So, but he was a good guy. And when I got to the parking lot, the guys were all excited and running around, and clearly something had happened. And it just happened. And I walked up to one of the guys, and I'm like, "What's going on?" And he said, like, I can't believe this. He said, "Some rolling 60s just drove by and opened fire. Nobody got shot, but that happened." And I would have been there with Asia. So that was crazy. But, and after that, I don't remember, like, it was one of those things that you start reevaluating your decisions in life, looking at these people like, I don't know, like, I probably shouldn't be hanging out here. So, you know, because the idea of having your baby there, you know, like,
Yeah.
that's crazy. So anyway, okay, so that was that first experience. That was the first time I heard that voice, but there's one other time that this happens, and I narrowly missed being broadsided by a car, but that happens later when I'm 23. So that's the first time I heard the voice, and it's male. It's a male voice. It's not female. So okay, so that happens. Now this is where the Ouija board saga begins. I'm 16 and I go to a slumber party. Now I was a young mom, obviously. And so I luckily had a good support system. And once a week, I was able to go be a kid, you know, and my mom would watch my daughter. So, or her Nana would watch her. And so I went to a slumber party at my friend Shannon's house, the Glitch in the Matrix girl. And I went over there, and now this is like 93 or 94. This is like end of 93, maybe going into 94. And there were several girls there, and Shannon brought out a Ouija board. Now, this was the first time I ever saw a Ouija board, and I certainly didn't know anything about them. And back then, you didn't have the internet. If you didn't hear things by word of mouth, you know, or read about it, you don't know about it. And then you had like Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings maybe was on by then, but yeah, so I didn't know that this was something to be cautious about or not do. And so they're all playing with it that night. And I don't know if I played with it that night with them. I mainly remember being up on the bed, sort of watching them and just not really sure if somebody's pushing it or whatever, you know. They were all excited about it. And so the next morning, now Shannon was my like little sister, you know, we came up together from knee high. So I was a very much at home at her house. I pretty much grew up there too. And so I don't know why I ended up being alone there. I was the last one to leave the next morning, but I was alone there. I was getting ready to go, and the Ouija board is still there, right? And I decided, I wonder if this thing works. So I get up, crisscross applesauce on the bed, put the board down in front of me, and I think I probably asked if anyone was there, you know, I mean, stereotypical first question. I remember asking whatever it was I asked a couple times, but it didn't take more than a minute and a half before I start feeling this like gravitational pull, right? I could feel it. I remember the sensation in my fingertips as it moved to yes. And I'm like, is this happening? You know, like, is this working? And so I ask another question. I get a response. Now, at first, it's kind of slow, you know, but it's steady. It's slow and steady the way it moves. And you get, and I had this pulling sensation of sorts in my fingertips. And so after it goes to a couple answers, I start to question, am I pushing this somehow? Like, am I somehow doing this? And I just want to verify that that's not the case. So what I did was I asked a question that I didn't know, but I could verify with Shannon later. And I don't remember what the answer was, but I do remember what the question was. And the question I asked was one of her family members' middle names. And it spelled out a name. That I do remember. And I was able to verify it with Shannon later. And I also don't remember if it was right or wrong, but there was a name spelled out. So at this point, I'm hooked, right? Like, I packed her Ouija board up, told her when I talked to her, I talked to her on the phone later, hey, I took your board, I'm going to use it for a while. She's like, yeah, okay, whatever. You know, I didn't never seen her use it before, so I don't think she cared, honestly. And so now I have it at home. And my room was in the basement at that time. And so I was using this by myself most of the time down in the basement. And it's not like things started to happen right away, but this is where when things do have, well, they began to, okay, so like the weeks and months following for the next year and a half or so it is like more stuff happens in that year and a half than that had happened ever before. Okay. And I don't make the connection. They're not like happening one right after another either. So you can have a couple months in between significant events. And I'm not making the connection that it's the Ouija board. So at first, I play this Ouija board. I would say I was enthralled with it. I wasn't obsessed with it, but I was enthralled with it. My mom played with me a couple times. She said she had a really bad feeling, but she just kind of went along, right? You know, anyway. And so after a few months of playing with this thing, it kind of just put it up on the shelf and kind of forgot about it, right? And I think that's another reason I didn't make the connection before I did. That the issues were coming from this Ouija board I brought in the house. So my daughter was probably about 13 months old, right around there, you know, a little over a year old. And she started to have these meltdowns, and she was a really content, easy bee. So this was out of character for her too. And she would tell me that she was scared of the ha-ha. She used to call it the ha-ha. And she still remembers it, which is crazy because she was so young. But every now and again, she'll talk about the ha-ha. And my daughter is now 27 years old. So she had described it to me as an adult, you know, when she's older, as like a porcelain mask. And that's all it was a mask, like a white porcelain mask. And it just scared her to death. And it would talk to her. She remembers very specifically being on the kitchen floor with her bottle, and that it was talking to her from under the table. So your child when your child is actually afraid, you know, and so I didn't know what to make of it. I was looking around trying to figure out what she was calling a ha-ha and what was scaring her. But you know, I just didn't know. And so the first thing that happens that I know something's really wrong is I got off work late. I think I closed that night at Taco Bell. And the Taco Bell I worked at was walking distance to my house. And her babysitter, her Nana, was in between the two. So she was asleep when I picked her up. She was about probably 15, 16 months when this happened. Anyway, my mom was out of town in California. I was just talking to her about some things yesterday, trying to kind of get organized. And she remembers that she was in California because when I told her about this that happened, she remembers the phone booth she was in when I told her this. So she was out of town. And so that meant she was divorced by then. So nobody was home. And this is a big house. So my manager was a friend of mine from the high school. His name was Josh, and he had a friend that come to pick him up after we closed, and they took me to pick up my daughter and then bring her home. so I wouldn't have to walk. So they came in with me for a few minutes. I don't remember why, because you know, like, I think they were just kind of seeing me in because the house was empty or something. But anyway, so when you walk in the front door, you're in the living room, the dining room's off to the side, and then right straight ahead from the door is a very short hallway. At the end of that hallway is the bathroom, and right here next to the bathroom is my daughter's room. And right at the end, at the head of the hallway in the living room, right here in the corner is a chair where Josh was sitting. He was sitting in this chair. And so he could see me going into the bedroom to put my daughter down and in her crib. Asia had a big crib, big sturdy crib. And when I pulled the side up, which I did by then because she was old enough to try to get out of her crib, I guess. When I pulled that side up, this came up to probably chest level on Asia. And so she usually didn't have any issues going down, right? But it was late. I mean, it was probably 11, 12 o'clock at night, maybe. And so I thought maybe she was overtired and why this was happening. So I lay her down. I felt horrible, but you know, later, but I didn't know, you know, so I go to lay her down. And as I'm leaving the room, she just like starts wailing. And so I go back and I kind of comfort her, and I just think she's overtired. Okay. You know, she'll fall asleep in a minute. Right. So I walk now from where her crib is to the door of the bedroom is about 4 or 5 steps. I got her adjusted and walk out of the room, but she's really crying, you know. So I'm right here in the living room talking to Josh and his friend for about a minute before I went back in, lay her back down, calm her down, give her her bottle, and walk back out of the room again. As soon as I walk back out of the room again, she starts wailing. So I let her cry for a couple minutes that time. Then I go back in the room to readjust her. And this time, this is when this happened. So I lay her down, try to get her, you know, calm her down. She is just not having it though. So I'm just like, I don't know what to do. She's just gonna have to cry herself to sleep then. So I go to walk back out. Now, as I go walking back out, I'm pulling the door handle behind me, right? Closing the door for the most part behind me. As I'm now, Asia never got out of her crib before. And if she had, I would have heard, it would have been a little drop for her, okay? It wouldn't have been graceful. And I would have heard that. I didn't hear anything. So just as I'm starting to close that door and it's just starting to actually close, goes quiet, and the door opens out of my hand. The door pulls back out of my hand and opens. And so Josh, I told you, sitting in that corner, he was looking towards all the action at the time, and he saw that happen. He jumped up because he thought somebody was in the room. You know, like the way it happened was in the snap of a finger. From the time I laid her back down, walked back out, and I jumped back. And then as I jump back and look into the door, he's already coming. Asia is standing there, like shaking. And her hands are in front of her like this. It wasn't her who pulled the door. She was too far from it too, to have even been her who pulled the door back open. I grab her right away, just jump back. Josh and his friend go into the room, and they're, you know, flip the light on. They look in the closet. They're looking everywhere. They're like, the hell happened? You know, how did that happen? Mm-hmm. So Asia never slept in her crib again. From that point on, Asia and I slept on the couch together for months after that happened. And I don't know how. I mean, I was pretty little then, so, you know, but that's what we did. And Asia, as long as we lived in that house, which was a couple more years, she never slept out of the same room that I was in. We eventually moved back into the basement, and there was a sort of a nook at the end of the bar that I hung a curtain, and she had her little toddler bed and her little setup in there. Her playroom was upstairs, but I couldn't have her sleep out away, you know, by herself anymore after that, and her like in her own room. So anyway, that happened. She was picked up out of her crib. I believe personally that there was a real danger to her in there that night. Maybe the ha-ha, I don't know. But I think it was her protection that was like, you need to get her out of here, you know, that lifted her out, lifted her safely. That there was never a noise of her dropping. 1 second she was here, 1 second she was here. That's in silent. It was silent how that happened, you know. So the guys were, I remember, you know, as I'm out in the living room holding Asia after it had happened, and after they had already looked through the room really careful, just standing there like shaking your head. Nobody really knew what to say, you know. But yeah, and then they left. And so that was the first real significant thing that happened, is after I brought the Ouija board in. And I guess that was like maybe 6 to 7 months after I had brought it in. So the next significant thing that happened was the banging, the night of the banging. And Asia, I think, was at her Nana's that night. My mom was there. My Aunt Stacy was in town visiting. My friend Cassandra was living with us until she graduated high school. And our dog was there. And we, so my aunt, my friend Cassandra, myself and my mom, we all watched this old black and white movie that night. And it's a classic. I can't remember the name of it, but it was like The Haunting or House on Haunted Hill, maybe the first one. But anyway, the big scary part of the movie that would happen throughout the movie was they're all in this big mansion, and in the middle of the night, there would be this banging on all the walls or whatever. And, you know, everybody would come running out of their room, and the women would go, ah, you know, and we're laughing at this, right? And my mom and I are like, oh yeah, that's really scary, you know? And so we're mocking it basically, right? Mocking this movie. And we all go to bed. And so my mom's on the top floor, and there's a long, narrow staircase from the top floor. And then, you know, at the bottom of the staircase on the side here, there's a door. That door opens to the living room. And that's the main, obviously that's the main floor. So I don't remember, my mom remembers that Stacy was sleeping on the couch, but I don't remember that Stacy was sleeping on the couch or not. I don't know if she was in the spare room in Asia's old room, or if she was on the couch or not. I was in the basement in my room with Cassandra. She was sleeping in my bed, and my dog Annie, a black lab, was lying on the floor next to me on my side of the bed. So this is in the dead of night. This happens like, I don't know what time it was, but probably, you know, 1, 2, 3 in the morning. Anyways, I wake up to what sounds like a damn wrecking ball on every side of the house, trying to knock the house down. There's no way to describe what this sounded like. And I like levitate out of bed, hit the floor running, and I'm running up to my, you know, towards my mom. And so I remember as I hit that first short stairwell, launching myself with the rail up the stairs. And when I had my hand on the rail, it was vibrating from the banging. as my mom was running down the stairs from the top floor down, she's kind of guarding herself with, she's running really fast because this, what the hell's going on, right? The house gonna fall down. So she's got her hands to not fall down the stairs because it was a really steep, narrow staircase. And so she could feel the walls by the shaking and vibrating of the walls, the vibration in her hands. So we both felt that, me on the bottom floor, her on the top. And this is a big house. And so anyway, when my mom comes out that door, like hits the bottom stair, comes out that door, I'm just coming through the dining room. So we have the living room and we can see each other now here we're meeting at the living room, basically. At this point, it's so loud that I have my hands like this up over my ears and I go to scream, "What is that?" And as soon as I do that, as soon as like my voice comes out, stops. And it's just, you could hear a pin drop. Now, the only thing weirder than that, what just happened, was my mom and my response to it. And the fact that the dog, Cassandra and Stacy, slept through it. So as soon as I yell that and it gets quiet, my mom and I kind of put my hands down, and then my mom and we stand there for maybe a few seconds and then simultaneously turn around and go back to bed and go to sleep. Don't say a word to each other. Nothing. Not after what is that? Nothing. I don't know why. It was like everyone was hypnotized that night. I just don't know. That's the best conclusion my mom and I have come to. So anyway, we wake up the next morning and we don't remember this. We don't remember. This is a common theme in this house, by the way, that things would happen and we wouldn't remember till we were out of the house later. So we went out to lunch the next morning or the next day. And while we were at lunch, it comes flooding back. And I'm like, what the hell was that last night? And my mom, she goes to say what? And then I see her remember, like the same thing happens to her. And she goes, oh my God, how could I forget that? And I'm like, I don't know. And then the only conclusion we could come to was that we wouldn't laugh at anymore, anything like that, paranormal, right? That we laughed at that stupid movie with the banging and now it happened, like.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we did talk about it throughout the next couple weeks or a few weeks, right? We would revisit that one. That was big. That was the first time the banging happened. The banging happened a total of 2 times, but we'll get there. So in one of these discussions me and my mom have about what happened that night and what's going on in this house, like first Asia gets picked up out of her crib, then this happens. So my mom starts asking me some questions, and I remember specifically, because this is what triggered the memory of the angel, or what I'm going to call the angel, because I don't know what else to call it. And so she says to me, I know that we've heard things and we've had some really weird shit happen, but have you ever actually seen anything? And I went to say no. And as soon as I went to say no, that's when it clicked. That's when I remembered the angel or the head. And my mom is a psych nurse practitioner. Okay. So, and she worked at the VA. She's semi-retired now. And she said she could see me, like, remember, like when someone kind of retrieves a lost, like a suppressed memory, she said, I saw you remember, like the shock, and how could I forget that, So I went to say no. And then I'm like, oh my God, how could I forget that? And she's like, what? And I go, I tell her, I think I saw an angel in the basement. So from that point on, I could remember. That's not a memory that ever faded with time. It was like, that's one of those, like when I saw Shannon coming up the street, the tattooed in my brain, I could visualize it in my mind's eye anytime I choose to. So anyways, I think the reason I remembered it that in this time frame is because there's possibly a connection as to where she was looking. Remember I said she was looking at a specific place? Okay. So I might be missing some things in between here, but I'm going to go to the next very significant thing that I can remember. So mind you, still haven't made the connection with the Ouija board, but I'm no longer playing it actively, and it's just sitting down there in the basement, probably with the planchette sitting on it and just all that good stuff, right? Where I'm sleeping and Asia's sleeping. So around this time, now we're in about 1995, okay? This is, I think I remember it being around maybe springtime. The weather was getting better, okay? And if you're from the Northwest, when the weather's getting better. So anyways, I was had just been dating my kid's dad for about 2 months at that time. Now, my daughter, my oldest daughter was 2 when I met my ex, and he raised her as his own, and we had 2 more children. So, and then we were together until I think that last time because we had got back together a few times, and how it goes, when I was about 29. So we start dating when I'm 17. Mm. He's about 21 at that time. And so we'd been dating a couple months, and my mom was out of town. And I can't remember if Asia went out of town with her grandma that time, or if she went to her Nana's that night, but it was a date night, right? And I remember that no one was home. And so when we had got home, he parked his car in the driveway, and I was sitting on the hood of the car, and he was standing in front of me, and we were talking before he dropped me off. And so the driveway is on the side of the house where Asia's old room was, where she got picked up out of her crib. And don't ask me why this is when it clicked about what the problem was, but I truly think I had guidance that night. Yeah. And kind of explain why. But anyway, we're sitting out there visiting, and I see the light come on in her room and turn back off. It came on for a few seconds, and then it turned back off, like someone turned it on at the switch, right? And for a minute, I forgot that nobody's home, right? And I thought my mom was looking for me. So I'm like, get up to walk in the house to see what, she needs. It's like probably 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning. It was really late. And I realized as I'm trying to walk in, oh, wait, nobody's home, And so he follows me into the house. I don't know if he knew, like that I had seen the light. I can't remember if he knew I saw the light come on or not, but he just followed me into the house. And so we walk in, you walk in the front door, you're standing in the living room. So I sat down on the couch, and I'm thinking, my wheels are going at this point, and it clicks. It's the Ouija board. You need to get the Ouija board out of the house. And now, to give you an idea of my ex, he's an auto body mechanic. He's a guy's guy. He doesn't have a belief system of any kind. And I've never talked to my friends about my experiences up to this point, never mind some guy I'm dating. So I think I really just had the opinion that my name cannot be Gypsy, and I also see ghosts and have these weird psychic experiences, you know, because where's your crystal ball, right? You know, like these two things can't both be happening. But that's how I know God has a sense of humor. So anyway, I'm sitting there on the couch and he's sitting next to me. And I think, you know, he could tell I'm thinking, and he's like, what's up? You know? And I said, I have a Ouija board and I think I need to get rid of it. I say this to him. And he's like, okay, you know, like, so, you know, he's like, okay, whatever, you know, he's just been dating me a couple months and I'm sure he's like, okay, right? Like he thinks it's silly, but he's not going to say anything. Let's get rid of the Ouija board. So as soon as we go to stand up, as soon as we stand up from the couch, boom, 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 that banging starts. Except this time, it sounds like about 15 people are down in the basement with brooms hitting the ceiling, right? And we could feel the vibration in the floor in our through our shoes. Mm. So I can't remember if Tony grabbed my shirt that time or not, but all I know, or if I sat down myself, but we both sat like asses dropped to the couch, right? And we'll never forget his face during this, ever. He looks at me and he goes, what the hell was that? Okay, so this is also why I think I had guidance that night, because I had this calm resolve, and it wasn't that I wasn't startled, and it's not that there wasn't fear there, but it wasn't the predominant feeling. And I don't know how I knew the things I knew that night. I had, like I said, no kind of education in shit paranormal. I didn't even know you shouldn't play Ouija board by yourself, or, you know, anything like that. So just because the paranormal happened in our family didn't mean we understood it on any level. So anyway, I sit there for probably a minute, you know, with him. And he's like, what the hell was that? And I said, I don't know, but I have to get rid of that board, because I knew that A, I needed to get rid of the board, and B, it had to be right now. It had to be when I started to go get rid of it, that it couldn't wait till morning, that I couldn't allow myself to get back down, basically. And now I know that that was true. And I understand why that was true. But then I was 17, I did not, but somehow I knew it, right? And so, and I felt like I would be okay doing it. So I told him, okay, I have to get rid of the board. I have to do this. And so I kind of see him, in my estimation, he kind of went, okay, I mean, and he didn't say this out loud, but in my estimation, he kind of resolves himself of, okay, that was weird, but whatever. I'm maybe, you know, that it's the pipes or something, and it was a coincidence. Who knows, right? Anyway, as soon as we sat back down, by the way, that noise stopped. Second time we go to stand up, clockwork. Boom, 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 boom. This time I remember very specifically him grabbing the back of my shirt and pulling me back to the couch. And he looked at me and he goes, Gypsy, I'm not going down there. And he was so scared. He had, at this point, basically the blood drained out of his face. His eyes were, you know, he's confused. His whole paradigm's getting just blown to pieces. Okay. Like, this isn't possible. What the hell was happening right now is what's going on with him. And he really is scared. So, you know, and I'm like, you know, and I sit there for maybe another 30 seconds with him. And I said, okay, okay. I said, you don't have to go. And I meant this. I wasn't like, you don't have to go with me. I'll go alone. It wasn't like that. I was like, it's okay. You don't have to go, but I do. And I'm going to go get this thing and get it out of the house. Well, he just deflates, right? Because he's been dating me a couple months. He really would like to continue dating me. And, like he can't be that guy that lets me go down in this terrifying situation by myself. Right. And so he's like, fuck, and I'll try to not cuss, but, so as soon as we'd sat down that second time too, it had stopped. So he's like, all right, and as soon as we stand up the third time, it starts and it's going. He's walking behind me, but you know what? I give him props. He went with me, even if he was behind me the whole time holding my shirt. Now, I'm not sure if that was to throw me or to pull me out, but he's behind me holding my shirt like this. And we walk through the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, back porch. This is still going on. Boom, boom, boom. It sounds like all hell's breaking loose. And so as we go down that first flight of stairs, second flight of stairs, now we're going to be turning and facing a very dark basement. That is happening right up until we get to that door that, is, and you're looking into the basement. So the way it was is the light switch, I had to run through that laundry room area, did have a drawstring light, but it was over in the wrong area. I didn't need to go that way. I had to run to that wall where the light switch was by the bar. So I had to run through the first half of the basement in the dark. As I remember, my ex stood back at the landing, right in the doorway. He didn't actually go in. Unfortunately, the board was at the very furthest point in the basement from the door. And so I hit the lights as I come through where I'd seen that head, where I described I'd seen the angel head. Okay, that's where the light switch is at. So I hit the lights. Luckily, they went on and stayed on. Quiet, nothing's happening. Nothing else happens that night. I grabbed the board. We walked it down a couple of blocks and threw it in someone's recycling bin. It was picked up that morning. And, the board never came back or anything like that. But as I was going through the basement to get the board, I said to God within myself, I didn't say it out loud. If you remove whatever it is I brought in here, I will never touch another Ouija board again, ever. And that seemed for the most part to work, actually, oddly enough. So I got the board out of there. It never, came back or anything like that. However, there was one more significant event that did happen. And this is when I was 18. When I was 18 is when we got pregnant with my youngest daughter. And we lived with my mother for most of my pregnancy before we moved into our own house. And so at this time when he came to live with us, now we had the basement, and I told you I had that curtain for Asia's area, but even with having him living there and whatnot, I couldn't have Asia sleep somewhere else in the house. It just too much had happened. I needed her to be close to me where I could hear and see things, right? So she did have her area kind of, the sleeping area at least, cordoned off, but yet it was still in the same area as I was. So my bed at this point was no longer down at the far end of the basement. It was more towards the middle. I could, when I'm laying on my side of the bed, I can see through the entryway into the basement to the basement door, right? And Tony was on the on the other side. This just happens to be where the angel was looking. Now, I didn't think about that when I put the bed there. And I also didn't think about the connection until I was about a year ago, because of my experiences where of the voice of seeing what I believe to be angelic twice in my life, at that point once. Because of that, I'm sorry, I just got lost. Oh, okay. I last year I tried to sit down and write out all my experiences with and synchronicities and things that were happening specifically. There was this 4 events prior, but in the last 3 years or so, I began to have what I believe are angelic encounters. And so I was writing them all out, and it triggered that connection that the angel was looking exactly where I would see a demon 2 years later. Exactly. And so I don't know if that's coincidental or if, because I do know that in the realm of spirit, it's not linear. Time isn't linear like it is for us, like we experience it. And was there, she doing her job somehow? I don't know. It's weird. But so anyway, this night I'm in a later term of my pregnancy and getting pretty close to when we're going to be moving out. So I have to get up and use the bathroom about 17 times a night by this point, right? And I have to go up all the way upstairs, come back down. So in the basement, we had a window off, like a regular basement window off from my side of the bed. And the neighbors had a security light on the side of their house, and it created a little ambient light in the basement for us. Other than that, it was pretty dark. So as I'm crawling back on to the bed to get myself situated, right on the other side of Tony, I was trying not to say his name, but I don't think he'll be watching. I see at what I could only call a demon or a goat man. It looked like part goat, part man. And it was completely black. But that doesn't, it was darker than the dark. It was very definitive too, in that sense that it is in the darkness, it stood out from the darkness, and it was the complete absence of light. Yet I could make out details with this thing. And so what it was doing, it was on Tony's side of the bed. And I don't know how or why I knew this or thought this, but it was crouched in like as if it were going to leap, like it was going to jump forward. And this just happened so fast, the way, seeing it, registering what I'm looking at, and then realizing it's going to jump on Tony's chest. And I slammed my hand down into his chest and I said, no. And he flies up, that it's immediately gone, right? And he flies up and he's like, what? And I blurred out, a demon was going to jump on your chest. And he's like, crying out loud, go back to sleep. You're having a nightmare. And so, well, I scared the bejesus out of him doing that, And he never brought it back up, and I never brought it back up either. But that night I did not go back to sleep. That night I laid there awake. I was scared. It really scared me. And so the legs on this thing were like goat legs. It stood on 2 feet. I didn't see the very bottom, like the bed cut that part off, but I could
Mhm.
see that the knees went backwards, like hocks, like dogs have hocks.
Mhm.
That's what its knees did. They went backwards. So I couldn't see the feet, but the torso and chest, shoulders, and all. I don't know if it had hands or not, but that was all human like. That was like a man, right? And it was kind of chiseled. I don't know. It's hard to explain how something can be completely dark in the dark, and yet there's some definitive detail there, but that's how I remember it. So it had horns like goat horns. They weren't really big. They, they weren't like some big giant, ram's horns or something, but they came off the forehead like that, and it didn't have eyes, like it didn't have like any glowing eyes or something like that. It looked like they were just depth, like there was depth to that though, in that area of the face. I don't remember any hair other than the fact that the body seemed to have kind of patchy hair, but you could still see through that and see that it was a chest, that it wasn't a complete animal. So yeah, that was that. I think that pretty much covers that. Now we're close to moving out of the 56th house. And other than that, nothing else happens that I can remember between the night of getting rid of the Ouija board and the night that I saw that wanted to jump on him. And I don't know why him, I've wondered about that. But who knows? So the night we moved out was the first time that my mother and I had a shared experience, but by location, that we were in 2 separate places and had the same experience at probably the same time, but roughly the same time. So this is the day we moved. I'm about 8 months pregnant, and my girlfriend helps me to help unpack. The guys move, whatever, we had to move in there. And that evening I'm unpacking the kitchen. I remember that I was unpacking the kitchen, and we moved about 5 miles away in this crappy little house off 82nd. And for some reason, okay, so I was standing at the kitchen counter, and at the end of the kitchen counter is a door that leads to I think what would be called like a mud room. It wasn't really a back porch, but like a mud room. And there was a well, an effing well. It was capped off. But I remember when we first looked at the house, that really bothered me, and maybe because I had a toddler, but it bothered me and it hit me in the gut type of way. So anyway, that door, I believe the door was slightly ajar, but I don't remember 100% if it was slightly ajar or not. So I'm washing the dishes, I'm taking the stuff out of box and wash them before I put them away. And so my friend is in the living room, which is right off the kitchen. And I don't know if she could see me from where she was sitting or not, but she's not very far. It was a very small house. And so I'm doing the dishes. This door is like right here. It's sort of like I can see my hand right now, and I can see it clearly, even though I'm not looking directly at it. So as I'm, doing this, a man, pretty tall man, walks through my back porch door. So this person, if it was a real person, had it been a real person, would have had to enter the back door to the house, come through the mudroom and enter the second door. And so when he comes in, he had a real presence to him, like he was taken over, That's the feeling, right? And he had longer hair, and as he stepped, because he came in like kind of fast, right? His hair, you know, was kind of going back, and he had a long trench coat on, but not the kind of trench coat people wear nowadays. This was like a real heavy, like cowboy type thing. And as he stepped in, as he kind of moved in, that coat opened, and it kind of went back a little bit. And I think he was wearing a hat. Anyway, it was brown. The coat was brown. And he was solid like me. This, to me, a man was walking in my house.
Yeah.
I jumped back, dropped the plate, and screamed. And my friend, as soon as I did that, he's gone. He disappeared. My friend, who'd been my friend since 5th grade, she's like, what happened? Now, she'd rushed into the kitchen. I'm standing there with my hand on my chest and my mouth hanging open, staring at this empty spot. And she's like, what happened? And I said, oh, I thought I saw something. And she goes, well, what did you think you see? What did you think you saw? Because she, you know, she knew me very well. And that was just unlike me, you know, I think she thought, tell me what happened, you know, but I didn't want to. This just was not something that I talked about outside of my family. So I guess as my brain is going, okay, this is some ghost shit again. I'm like, it was nothing, you know. So she was kind of pestering me for, you know, next 15 minutes or so to tell her. And looking back, I wonder if she saw him maybe and wanted me to say what I saw. I don't know, but she never told me she saw him, but she really was pestering me to just tell me. And I was telling her, I didn't, you know, basically nothing happened, but she wasn't buying it. So anyways, I talked to my mom the next day, and what I didn't know was my mom came home from a movie. She walks through the front door. So when you walk through the front door of that house, she had things boxed up because she also was selling the house at the point. The house had just sold and she was moving to another one. So she had things boxed up, a lot of, you know, of the stuff boxed up. She was only there for a couple more weeks. She walks into the front area. You can see you're in the living room, but right here, big archway. Then you got your dining room, and you see right into the kitchen, and you can see the back porch door leading off to the landing in the back, right to the stairs. So as she comes in the front door, she sees a man with long hair and a brown coat, as solid as a real person. She sees who I saw. And he's walking off the back porch right towards her. He's looking at her. And she said she's not sure why, but she ran at him. You know, instead of going back out the damn door, she runs at him. As she does that, obviously he disappears.
Wow.
So, yeah. So that was the first shared experience, but not being together. And that's happened. I've had shared experiences with my grandmother, who's 8 hours away from me. And so this is something that would happen again, not with the same guy, but just a shared experience would happen again. So it's at that point that I had this epiphany in this little house that I'm in, that it's not the houses that are haunted. You know, that's the first time I thought the house isn't haunted, I'm haunted. That's what I thought. I remember that because it was an epiphany moment for me, and it was kind of gave me some dread, I guess, in a way. Because up until this point, yes, I had some good experiences, right? But more often than not, it tended to creep me out, right? Or downright scare me. So Okay, so that nothing else happens at the 82nd house. And then the next significant thing that I can remember in particular was when I moved back to my mom's. I moved back to my mom's a few years later. And Tony and I end up renting the whole bottom floor. So we're like cohabitating at this point, right? My mom bought a different house, and it's just, you know, I'm an only child, and it just worked out, right, for us to do it this way instead. And so, and I was happier to be close to my mom. And so I had Sabrina and Tyler at this point. The first time Tony and I break up, I'm about 23, 24 years old. So this is okay, I need to back up. I missed a major experience. When I was pregnant, I saw the Goatman or demon, whatever, and the guy in the brown jacket. I'm pregnant with Sabrina. When I'm pregnant with Asia, I saw the angel or light being or whatever it was. When I'm pregnant with my son, my youngest child, I am 21 years old, and this was up until that point, the scariest thing that ever happened to me this time. And I know you'd think it'd be the Goatman guy, but that was so damn fast. This one was the one that really took the cake for me at that point. So there was many rooms in this basement, in this new house. One of them was me and Tony's room. And the girls' room was up on the main floor. So, okay, so there's a few windows in this room where it gets pretty good ambient light. I think the television or something was on too, but the room wasn't just completely dark. I could see things. When I was pregnant with my son, to describe how big my stomach got, my doctor had me go in for not one, but 2 ultrasounds to make sure there wasn't twins. It was ridiculous. When I was 7 months pregnant, I looked 12 months pregnant. And when I was 9 months pregnant, I was something people would stop and point at. I was like a freak show. I mean, it was just nuts. And yeah, luckily that was definitely my last kid. So I couldn't tell you if I was really late in I don't think I was super late in my pregnancy, but I was big at this point. And because of that, I had to, use the bathroom all the time. So I'm getting up for the umpteenth time to go to the restroom in the middle of the night. And the last time I'd seen what I saw it getting back into bed. This time I was getting up to get out of bed. So I sit up, I'm uncomfortable. And I realize, as I'm getting myself up and out, it wasn't easy all the time for me to come from a lying position to be, getting up. And so at the foot of my bed, once I did get myself up, there is a girl, and she's like 7, 8 years old, maybe. And she's dripping wet, and she's in this nightgown, and maybe it was an older white dress, but her head was down like this. She's looking down at the floor, and she's standing, her arms are just hanging there. This was by the way, this is like 1999, because my son was almost a New Year's baby on 2000. So this is 99. And her arms are hanging at her side, just limp. her head's down. She's looking like down at her feet. And at first, you know, I'm thinking, you know, I have my daughter who is 3 years old, and then I have my oldest daughter who's about 6 years old, you know. And so for a split second, I thought it was my youngest daughter, you know, before I realized she's dripping wet, right? And, you know, I leaned forward and like, what's wrong, you know? And she is, when I, okay, so as soon as it, you know, I realized you're not my daughter, right? Who is this? That's when her head starts to rise up. Now I've been looking at her for several seconds at this point. She's not gone anywhere. She also is solid. She doesn't look like a ghost, you know, typical, you think a ghost should look like, right? She looks like a kid standing there who's wandered in the house. And so her head, I know this sounds like it came out of a movie or something, but I can only tell you what happened. So her head starts to rise up, and she doesn't just like whip her head up, right? But as she does this, her arms come up with her hands like this. And when she did that, she makes eye contact with me, and I got chills right now, like goosebumps right now, just talking about this and seeing it. So when her hands come up and she makes eye contact with me like this, I felt this pulling in my solar plexus, like a pulling. And I don't know how to explain it a different way. So one hand went on my stomach and the other hand went up like this, defensively. And I remember that I was pushing her back, and I don't know why. Like, it's not like I knew how to handle these moments, right? But instinctively, I guess I did. Okay. Because when I did this, it worked. And then she was gone. I think I said no. Also, I don't know. I wish I would have gone over to see if the floor was actually wet. I didn't. I also didn't go upstairs and go to the bathroom. I woke up Tony, and this was a time, you know, one of the few times, like, I woke him up kind of incidentally because I slammed my hand into his chest the first time, right? But this time I woke him up, and you know, he's like, what? And I said, this time I told him there was a dead girl at the end of the bed. And he did the same thing. He said, Gypsy, you're dreaming, go back to bed. And yeah, I wasn't dreaming. And I didn't go back to sleep. So I know I wasn't dreaming, because it was not an easy feat for me to be up from laying down. And I didn't fly up, right, from a dream. I'd been up for a few seconds, like getting my giant self up. And so that really scared me, because that was the first time that I not only felt like one of these things saw me, but that I was the focus. The other times was almost like I was witnessing something that was incidentally happening in front of me, if that makes sense. Anytime I actually saw something with my eyes anyway. So with each pregnancy, for whatever reason, I had these incredibly intense, it was with my second daughter, it was 2 times. But with each kid, you know, there was an event, so to speak. So I can tell you, how are we on time?
We still got about 20 minutes.
Okay. So I think I can take you up to Caritas Plaza, probably in 20 minutes. So the next time I hear the voice that sounds like thunder that stops you in your tracks, this was the second and the last time I heard that voice. I was about 24. I think I was 24. And we had broke up for the first time. We had our first, we stayed broke up for a year or so before we reconciled. But he moved to an apartment right at the end of my block so that we could co-parent, easier, And so he just lived like a block and a half. The kids could walk back and forth basically from where I lived to where their dad was at. And they would go to his house. We were alternating weekends so that the kids were staying together on the weekends. So every other weekend I had all three kids. And then during the week I had all three kids. So it was my weekend where I didn't have kids, and I wasn't comfortable at home at first. Like, I didn't know what to do with myself at first. I had had kids since I was 15, and I wasn't used to quiet, being without them, and I didn't like it. It was too quiet. So I get off work. I was working at Meyer and Frank at that time. I get off work, and I basically, the first couple months, on these weekends, I would basically pack myself an overnight bag and go hang out with a friend for the night. And so I had done that, and I had made plans with a friend of mine to watch movies with him and his roommate. And his name was Jason. We were pretty good friends. And so I went over there. We watched Leaving Las Vegas, and that night, he was my pot dealer at the time. That's before it was legalized here in Washington and Oregon. And so, we're just sort of hanging out, watching this movie, and we're all having a good time. But I didn't want to drive right away, right? So I slept for a few hours before I got in the car and drove. I was fine when I woke up, and it was early Sunday morning. It was about 4 to 5 in the morning. Now, I got up and left that early because I'd been friends with him for quite a while at this point. And randomly in the middle of the night, he tried to put the moves on. And I was really uncomfortable and surprised by that. So I pretended to be asleep and then slid out. So I'm driving home. And okay, so from where he lived to where I lived, I could pretty much drive all the way up Prescott in Portland. This is Portland. Drive all the way up Prescott. When you get to 33rd in Prescott, there's an S. So I'm coming up Prescott. 33rd is the intersection right here. And Prescott has an S curve. So you can't see at all until you're in the middle of the intersection, until you're out in the intersection, you cannot see traffic coming this way. And so I'm approaching 33rd in Prescott, and the light is green. There's nobody out. And so I'm just cruising along, and I hear, stop. And this is that same voice that said, go home. This is that same voice. And I had the same reaction. I stood on the brakes, pushed back into my seat, right? Pushed back into the back of my seat. My hand went up to my chest, and I looked both ways, and I said, what? Same exact response this elicited from me, right? So I'm stunned, and the car is at a stop now, right? I look, it's green. I look like this. I must have sat there for a few seconds. I start releasing my foot from the brake. And as I release my foot from the brake and start to roll, this police officer going like freeway speed with no lights on blasts through that intersection. And that was the second time I heard that voice. That was the last time I heard that voice.
Oh, wow.
So that,
I said, oh, wow.
Yeah. So I couldn't think of another explanation than I would say, I think an angel saved my life. that's the way I would put it, you know, when I would talk to my mom or my grandma about it. So that happened. And then, let's see. I don't remember a whole lot happening at that house. There were a couple instances that did happen in that house off Prescott. Definitely the girl at the end of the bed. It was more of the feelings that I would get in certain places in the house, and that kind of seemed to be universal in the family.
Mhm.
When you were going up the basement stairs, you always just wanted to run up the basement stairs. And I'm not sure why that was, but okay. My daughters did have some experiences there. And when my daughter had a room in the basement, there was a period of time where I homeschooled and we had a classroom down there. And, you know, it was all set up like a classroom. It was really cute. And they were, you know, Portland public schools are horrible. And so, well, there was 2 separate times in elementary school that I just decided that it would be better to do it this way. So my youngest daughter had a room down there that was sort of adjacent to the classroom. And she had some experiences. And when those happened, our Rottweiler would lay on her and growl, and he wouldn't let her up. He wouldn't growl at her. He would growl whatever it was that was scary. So she didn't say so much it was what she saw. It was like the atmosphere would change in the room. One of these times a candle lit, and they had come upstairs to, you know, all upset because that happened. Another time that with my dog Isaac, the Rottweiler, was kind of interesting as far as protecting them, or how he knew, you know, he had knowledge he shouldn't have had. Let's put it that way. That he was definitely path of least resistance. He never jumped the fence before or after this event, but we had a little corner store at the end of the street, and it was had like Mexican candies and breads. It was a Mexican-owned store, and my oldest daughter would like to walk down there and get her little candies that she liked. So she asked me one day, could she walk down there? And I said, that's fine. You could see it from the house. And so she walked down there. She's in the aisle getting her candy, and she turns around and Isaac's standing there, our dog, our Rottweiler. He had jumped the fence. And she's like, Isaac. And so she grabs him and she walks him back home. So she comes in to tell me Isaac jumped the fence and followed me to the store. As she's doing that, I walk back outside with her, and there's police pulling up to the store down there, and it got robbed.
Oh.
Yeah. So that happened. Not really paranormal, but it's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
So I can't remember a whole lot that happens between. So there's sort of like a dry spell in a sense, paranormally speaking, between like 26, 27 and like 30. Oh, wait. Okay. Yeah. So when did that happen? That had to be about 30 years old. Okay. So, all right. So the next significant thing, okay, let me back up. When I moved to Hawaii with my ex and the kids, we had reconciled. We ended up moving to Kauai on the northern island. And we had a house in Hanapepe. And so something really tragic happened right before we moved. And I wasn't handling it well. And so this was a really difficult time in my life, a few years in my life. And basically, it was sort of a geographical solution, but it turns out wherever you go, there you are. So my problems followed. And so I had a near-death experience there, and while we lived in there. And so I had got increasingly depressed, right? While we lived there, probably about 1.5 to 2 years that we lived there before we came back to the mainland. And so I'm going to keep this vague, just because. So I became increasingly depressed. I really didn't see a way out of it after a couple years. And I decided I needed to check out. So I planned that, and then I did that. And so he found me and called an ambulance, and I go to the hospital. I was in a coma for maybe 2 days before, and I was on a ventilator. So I was like in this in-between state, I think, straddling in between. I wasn't ever pronounced dead, but I was in this limbo. And while I was in this horrible, dark place, okay, have you ever seen the movie Insidious?
Yeah.
Okay, you remember the darkness and the further, and there was a girl, and she was like crying in a corner, and she sort of just isolated in her own pain. This is what this reminded me of. In fact, when I saw that movie later, I was like, oh my God, I think somebody had an experience like mine, because it was so very similar, you know? So I was in this dark place, and I couldn't move. I couldn't negotiate moving. I had my body, but I couldn't negotiate moving my body. And all that pain I thought I had before was compounded by 10, because I could feel the pain of everyone who loved me that I affected with this action. So, and the guilt was like, I can't even put a word on. I mean, guilt is the only word we have for it. But, and I knew, I mean, I didn't get told this. Nobody like came up and told me this in this place, but I understood that I couldn't move out of this place until the last person that I affected was okay. So I was in this place, and the guilt was so profound that when I woke up on the ventilator, now, typically the first thing a person feels when they wake up on a ventilator is that they're suffocating, right? Because you have a machine breathing for you, and it feels like suffocation. So that they tie your hands down, right? So you don't, because people will wake up and they'll rip that out, right? They'll rip that tube out.
Yeah.
So I wake up, and it's not the suffocation that I feel first, and predominantly it's that horrible guilt, right, that I had in that place that I was at. And I understood that if I left this plane in that fashion, that's what I had to look forward to. And it was a purgatory. The only way I can really make sense of that is that it's a place of purgatory. And yeah. So anyway, I go on to be hospitalized for about 8 weeks after that, after I woke up, right? And when I came home, now, mind you, I knew that I just had to go through what I was going through after that experience, no matter how much I, didn't want to go through it. So, anyways, I'm in the hospital for about 8 weeks. I come home, and I think it was the first day, maybe it was the next day after I got home, but I'm sitting back on the lanai, and everybody in Kauai has an outdoor living space too, right? And so I'm sitting back out on the lanai, and the washer and dryer is over here. It's a covered space, but it's outside. And there's like the cupboard above it with the cleaning supplies. And ever since this event had happened, the trauma that had happened, that was the first time in my life that I didn't have this innate connection to the divine. Just even if I wasn't religious, and I wasn't religious, I was spiritual. And it didn't matter what was happening in my life. I never felt separated from God. But this was the first time in my life I did feel separated from God. I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel my grateful heart. I couldn't see beauty. You know, it was just like everything was colorless, you know, and I was mad all the time. God, I was mad. So anyways, I'm sitting there and I'm just spent. Okay. I've, you know, just feel like I've been fighting for a couple of years at this point. And for the first time since this thing happened, I talked to God like in a real way. And so I said to God, I basically said, I know that I can't die, meaning I can't check out, right? Like I'm not going to do that, but I don't know how to live anymore. That's what I said to him. I don't know how to live anymore. Like, help me. And right then there was that light that I told you that composed the face of that head. This is what I saw, but this time it wasn't in the form of a face or any being. This was a spiral of light. So what out of the cupboard and like washing machine area, this spiral formed, the spiral of light formed, and it was composed of that white light, but like within it, it was almost like a rope that spiraled into it. And that was it was like a light rope, you know. It just didn't look quite as you could see through the other kind of white, but that one was solid. Okay. And so yeah, and when this presented, I felt for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. I felt okay. And this time I did get a message. And what this message was is, so this light appears and I'm looking at it and it said, you're going to be okay, but you have a lot of work to do. And then it disappeared. But when it had appeared, it gave me the sense of how I would actually feel when I was okay again. So when I was able to find my path to healing in the following few years, it took a while. It's basically the way I feel now, you know, most of the time. It just does really matter what else is happening. I can touch peace, right? Regardless of having a bad day. So that's basically the feeling that I was given. So it went away. Now, when I got up to leave the lanai, I don't know how long it took, but there was an amnesia again. So just like the first time, I forgot this for several years. I remembered in similar fashion, but I also remembered when I had just began getting on my real path to healing. When I began DBT, and I was in therapy and stuff prior, but it wasn't helping. It was talking myself in circles, basically. So once I found DBT and learned some mindfulness practice and things like that, that's when I really truly began to get my footing again. And so I also began to study again. So I was studying, you know, I read the Buddhist holy text. I was studying in Christian metaphysics, and I began my meditation practice and my spiritual discipline. So this is just a few months into this is when I had the memory of what happened. And I asked, why would I forget? Like, why was I not allowed to remember that? I needed that then. What was the use of forgetting that and going through so much more dark days, in between? And the conclusion I came to fairly quickly was that I would have misunderstood the message, that when it said you're going to be okay, I would have waited to get okay and wait for it to come to me. And I had to find my peace. So that was I believe was angelic in nature. And that was the last time that I saw with my eyes an angel, or I think was an angel. So when we get to Korea, now this brings us up to right before I move into Caritas Plaza. And like I said, there's certain places that are regular haunted, and then there's places you'll live where you'll periodically have experiences. Speaking of myself, Caritas Plaza was regular haunted.
Okay.
And we don't really have time to go into that yet, but this begins at, when I'm 33, begins the very, it goes from sporadically having events happen in my life to regular events happening with a regularity I was never used to before that. And I think that's because that's when my meditation practice began, and it just blew open my sensitivity.
Okay. Well, I definitely will have you on for another episode to tell that whole story too. I have tons of questions for you. So
Sure.
If you're ready, we'll go ahead and start with it.
I am. I'm going to get my drink, my lemonade here.
You mentioned that you heard something similar to like broken dishes, but there was nothing broken. I had the same experience when I was cleaning at a caregiving house I was working at, and I bent over and it sounded like someone threw like a plate or a light bulb bust against the wall, and I jumped up to go look, and there was nothing there. Light bulbs worked, they were fine. I just couldn't explain it. So I'm glad to find someone who has shared the same kind of experience with me.
Yeah, that was my my family. I was an infant. I only was in that house that first 3 days. So I heard, I did have that experience. I thought a light fixture fell when I was in the Prescott house. My grandma was with me. We went downstairs to clean up the glass and nothing had broke. So that as far as the things in the kitchen that were breaking, my mom and grandma heard that. And the family, my uncle and everyone, they would experience that there at that house. But I did have that happen one time, and that was thinking that the light fixture had fallen.
That's so crazy.
Yeah,
it's such a. I wonder what that means.
I don't know, but it's a very distinct sound, breaking glass.
Yeah,
and if you hear it, you expect to find broken glass.
How big was that fiery ball that you see?
Outside. Oh Lord. I mean, bigger than a house. It was huge.
Okay.
Yeah.
What color was it?
It was orange, but a very deep bordering on red. And it was like maybe a little bit lighter orange also within it, because like I said, it was gaseous in the way that it was like it was in a sphere. It was almost like gas inside of a sphere. And so gas will move, right?
Yeah.
Gases will move around in a sphere. But yeah, that, and it should have been bright, but it in the sense that it should have illuminated something around it, at least the immediate sky right around it, but it didn't.
What do you think it was?
I think that now, since I saw the Phoenix Lights documentary, I think it was that same phenomenon, or I do think it was a UFO of some kind. Well, it's definitely a UFO as in the most literal sense, that it's an unidentified flying object. So that it was, but I could not tell you, anything else about it other than what it looked like.
Okay. How old was you, and what year was it when this happened?
Okay, so this had to have been 1988. to 1989, maybe 1989, but I do think it was 1988. I think it was around the 4th of July because my dad was so sure that it was a Roman candle and it was getting dark late, later in the day at that
Yeah.
time. So I think that it was around 4th of July in either 88 or 89, and I was 10 years old. About 10
Okay.
years
All right. When you had the glitch in the matrix with your friend Shannon, later in life, did you ever tell her about the whole scenario, what happened, and what did she think if you did?
I don't think that I did, because I never spoke outside of the family on one paranormal experience until I was 33 years old. Ever,
Okay.
not once. And I had some very close friends. When I finally opened up, it was only because I had pictures, and I had at that point moved into Corridas Plaza, and that place was so active. And that was the first time I began getting pictures.
Okay.
I could say, see, look, basically, look what, and I think before that, it's not that, like, in particular, my friend Lacey, who seemingly knew everything about me, right?
Mhm.
When I showed her the pictures and I'm kind of yammering off about the things that have been happening in this apartment, and then starting to reference back to things that have happened before in my life, she's like, whoa, wait a minute. Why is this the first time I'm hearing about this? And I said to her, it's not, I said, because I don't tell anybody. I said, it's not that you would think I was lying. It's that you couldn't believe me. You just can't. And, that I only spoke about these things within my own family, where we're all experiencers,
Okay. What did you think? Like, what was going through your mind when that first happened, where she was there, the two years ago version of her, and then gone, and then here she comes, and like, what was you thinking? What was going on?
Well, it kind of, at the very first, when I saw her, I was just relieved to see her, and it didn't occur to me that she doesn't look like that right now.
Mhm.
That she didn't look like that, right? I didn't.
Yeah.
But she came out of nowhere, and I was just so relieved to see her. Or I was just relieved to see her. So I start heading towards her, but when she disappeared, it's like my mind flatlined, like my brain flatlined a little bit, and just kind of like, duh, like, whoa, what did I, but I'd seen her for several seconds, and I'd hollered at her and
Yeah.
I knew I'd seen her. So I didn't question, like, oh, I must have just imagined that. That never happened. I knew I saw her.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until a little bit later that I realized she had her curls, and that it was Shannon, but it wasn't Shannon. And I think it's because I was so young and I didn't have any verbiage, really,
Yeah.
at 9 or 10 years old, to conceptualize about what happened, that it's just not something I really revisited much until I was older, and I was more or less embracing the experiences I had in my life.
Mhm.
Because it's not something, oddly enough, that I spend a lot of time thinking about before this last, maybe 10 years, 8,
Okay.
9. I don't
Well,
know.
you know how time, like you even mentioned, it's not like we see it, like the human way of seeing it. It's actually happening all at once. Past, present, future. It's all going. It's all different timelines, all going at the same time.
Yes.
When you've seen your friend Shannon, and this is just like what my idea would be, and you've seen that guy that looked like a cowboy close to it, and he disappeared. and maybe even a few other evil entities like that goat looking figure. What if they're just, you know, just different parts? Like we would see it in different time, you know, and you're able to see different time as it's happening. So maybe it happened in the past or happened in the future, the way we're looking at it. It's really complex, confusing, but for you to see it and then it disappear, you know, that could have been an event that really happened. That guy could have lived there. Shannon could have possibly went down that road 2 years ago, you know, on her bike. I
So
mean,
that's interesting that you say that, because so when we bought that house on 56, 2 blocks down on 58th, my stepdad's dad used to own the house down there. And when he died, my uncle and aunt bought, they inherited that house.
mhm.
And they lived there. That first year they lived there, my birthday party was held there. And that's the birthday party when I turned 8 years old. And I remember the blue bike that I got at that birthday party. It was like my first big girl bike, right?
Yeah.
And so my I guess my mom had Shannon's mom send her bike to or whatever. Shannon was at that birthday party and she was about 6 years old. She did have those curls and she did look just like that. And we rode our bikes at my birthday party. So it's funny you say that, because it is very possible we went
Yeah.
down that street. Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool that you got to experience something like that. And how strange it would have been too to do it.
Yeah, it was weird. It was
Now,
weird.
when you had that that experience where you seen this big woman's head of light, did you recognize her face at all?
Mm-mm.
No. Let's see. Would you be able to draw or sketch out that giant head of light if you had time?
I'm a pretty bad artist, but I don't think I could do it any justice, because she was really beautiful, you know.
Okay.
She was just very beautiful. And plus those orbs of light within the white light, that would just be so hard to try to get a, I don't know how I would even start that. My
Okay.
grandma might be able to do it. She's the artist in the family.
Let's see. Why? Well, I was going to ask you this, but you kind of answered it already. Why do you think the big head, light head, was there? And then I also was thinking, you know, when you told your grandma, or your grandma, you told me about your grandma, where she would kind of always put this white light around you, right? And you said marinate you in it, you know, positive white light. What if
Yeah.
that light ended up being that it's an entity of itself now? It's that angel, it's protecting you. So that personality she put into it, the love she put into it, the intent, and then it transformed into something that carried on throughout your life. So
You know, that's possible, because I have been held in more grace than one person deserves. Maybe even particularly probably me at certain times in life. And I've always felt truly like it had this feeling that it was my grandmother's prayers, because my grandma is a metaphysician. She is 3rd generation Christian Science, okay? Which is not to be confused with Scientology. A lot of people get those two mixed up. Christian Science is metaphysical Christianity, and she was 3rd generation. That's the school of thought spiritually that I was brought up in, and so that's the foundation of my spiritual language, I guess, is to put it. I wouldn't identify with a religion, but I think I'm always going to view things through the lens of metaphysics for that reason. And my grandmother has been a dutiful metaphysician for me. And I've been very lucky to have someone to do that kind of work for me.
Yeah, it'd be good to have more people like her around doing that for everybody.
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
keep a lot of positive energy around. Now, you were mentioning that you also play with a Ouija board. Did you ever not say goodbye on there? You know how like they say it's supposed to have a proper way of saying goodbye when you're done playing with it. Did you ever say goodbye on there?
It's possible. Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure I did. You know, I played it alone. I didn't ever read the rules. I didn't know what I was doing. It's very possible, especially because I had a baby and I'm sure I got distracted.
Okay. Um, you also talked about your daughter when she would see the ha-ha.
Yeah.
You said she still remembers it today.
Yes.
Would she be able to like do a sketch of that entity to see what more detail what it looked like?
I do think she could do it. Whether she would do it, I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Why do you think that when those certain scenarios would happen, like the wall shaking, you would get hypnotized and then you would forget about, you know, what happened, like the banging? Like, why do you think that kept happening?
My mom and I have talked about that many times, asking that same question. And, you know, it's my grandma describes these things. Now, my grandma has had these experiences as well throughout her life. For whatever reason, in the last 3 to 5 years, these events have picked up exponentially in our family. This
Yeah.
has gone from something that went from being sporadic to with regularity to being daily, more often than not. And we don't know why. Specifically, my grandma and my mom lives in a very toxic haunted house right now with my stepfather.
Okay.
And that is its own show, honest to God. That my mom would be willing, she already said she would be willing
Cool.
to talk with you
Yeah.
and verify. She's a little, you know, she's a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So she's like, you know, it's probably not the best look, but the bottom line is that these things are true and that it's
Yeah.
not born of psychosis or delusion. And so she's actually a good, you know, objective and qualified person to say, you know, I can't tell you why these things happen, but I can tell you that this is what's happened.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to have her on. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'll let her
Um,
know.
yeah, please. And if she wants to stay anonymous, we can do that too. We can, you know, just keep her off video or something, or change her name, anything that, you know, whatever will work for her. So
Okay.
when you seen this goat man, was it more of a shadow entity with details?
Yeah. It had mass. So it wasn't like a shadow projected, you know, like you'd see your shadow.
Hmm.
And it had both, it seemingly had both mass and depth.
Okay.
It was you know, I was thinking about this when I was trying to get things organized yesterday, because the prospect of talking about my paranormal experiences is so overwhelming because of the amount, you know, and it's like, where do I start? And I finally decided, after wrestling with it, I just got to start from the beginning, and I'm just going to try to work my way up. And yeah, so and I was thinking about this yesterday, and I thought, you know, it might be like what, maybe if you could look at a black hole, what that would be like. And that kind of dark matter, you know, if you could see dark matter here, that might be made of that. It was very solid. And I don't know why I could make any detail out on it, given the fact it was like black against dark.
Hmm.
I don't know if I was seeing it in my mind's eye or how that worked. Like I said, there was a little bit of ambient light from the neighbor's security light, but not a whole lot. You
Okay.
know,
When you said that you seen the little girl at the foot of your bed, and she was drenched in water, my question is, what do you think she wanted? And then I also came with the idea. Do you think like when she rose her hand up, you felt that magnetic pull in your stomach that she was trying to like maybe some kind of switch places with the child inside and kind of be like, that movie where I guess a child took the place of the actual child and it's evil, like switch souls.
I didn't see that movie, but okay, so at the time, what my fear was at the time. So if remember, I had said I had a 4-year-old daughter. She was about 3 or 4 at that time, my youngest daughter. This to me looked like she might look at about 7 or 8, and I was terrified that for when she was 6, 7, 8 years old, I wouldn't let her near water. And my uncle got a really nice boat. It was the kind like could go out on the ocean and stuff. I mean, it was a nice big boat. And they begged me to let her go out on this boat with them more than one time, and I wouldn't let her. Finally, I relented. I basically told my mom that if you want to tie her to you, and she can never take off the life jacket, and it's on you, like I don't think you can live with the consequences if something were to happen. She promised nothing would, nothing did. In retrospect, looking back, it didn't look just like her. I don't think it was. I think that was really my fear, is
Oh,
that
wow.
that possibly it was like not that I had a word for it at the time, but what you'd call it now I know would be referred to as a crisis apparition.
Okay.
So I think that's I think it's possible that there was some sort of accident in that house. There was a bathroom in the basement. And remember I said there were certain areas in the basement that were kind of universally people experience being creeped out,
Yeah.
heavy feeling. Well, that bathroom, no matter what, we could never keep that bathroom working. The shower, the toilet, the water in that bathroom. They're really, my mom tried a few times, had plumbers out, whatever. It just, you never could keep it working. But it had the heaviest feeling. And it was a creepy bathroom. Essentially it was just kind of closed off, and nobody ever went in there. But I don't know if something happened in there before.
Yeah.
Or not. That's kind of just, I mean, obviously that's a guess, a complete guess, that it's a possibility that something happened, an accident happened. And as far as the feeling goes of that pull that I felt, I didn't know then, but I do know now that a spirit trying to enter most often is going to enter through the solar plexus chakra or the throat chakra.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why a lot of times when you see or hear, read, whatever about cases of possession, a person will vomit both when enters and when it exits. Okay. So I do think, yes, I do think there was a connection trying to be made. And intuitively at the time, that in the moment before my brain could start turning and going, oh my God, what if, that kind of looked like Sabrina, and that my head started going that way. So, but in that moment, intuitively in that moment, I felt like she was trying to enter trying to be my baby, honestly, or take my baby. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Man, Gypsy, you have a lot of experiences, and I'm so happy to have had you come on and tell them. And I look forward to having you on again and telling some more of your stories. Before we end the show, though, would you like to give some closing comments and advice for anybody that could experience the same scenarios?
Yeah. I think the most important thing that I could offer is that it's important to handle your fear. If you're experiencing anything paranormal in the moment, if you just have a random paranormal experience, or whether you maybe live in a place where you're having problems, that it's important to handle your fear. And before you start trying to respond or take any action, you pretty much need to be in a place of calm. It's important to try to be calm. Go to your breath and, just do whatever it does that spiritually centers you, because it's your fear that can really truly make you vulnerable to an actually being harmed. And you do have that spiritual dominion you can exercise. So you can, hold your space. You can hold your space. You don't have to be afraid. And would also add that in general, like attracts like. So the higher vibrationally you are sort of vibrating at, a lower vibrational energy can't truly attach to you when you're practicing peace. So do whatever you do that brings you peace on a regular basis. And you should probably, be okay. But specifically with all these people out here these days seeking out paranormal to have their own personal experience and going over here and asking, is anybody here? Is anybody there? You're screaming out into the void. You don't know who you're going to attract or what you're going to attract. And I'm not saying don't do it if that's your thing to do. I'm just saying that you yourself have to, you need to have an inner strength and resolve and peace and love within you and your heart and your mind before you go do those things, because attachments are no joke. And I can talk about attachments in the next episode, because I would go, in my 30s, I got one. I learned how to identify what I was dealing with, and then subsequently got to learn how to handle attachments.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Gypsy, for coming on. And she also has evidence of pictures and videos that she's going to try to send. And if she does, then I'll make sure to attach it to the end of this video. But thank you guys for watching. And again, thank you, Gypsy. And I hope you guys all have a great rest of your evening. And this has been another episode of Real Supernatural Encounters. We'll see you guys later. See ya.